Hello, everybody. This is week 3, assignment number 5. It's called Giving In Leaders in World War II. So we are just going to talk about some of the things that you may need to know before starting this lesson, or some of the things that may have been confusing to you as you looked at the lesson and kind of went, whoa, I don't know what I'm doing here. So the lesson objective is students will be able to describe appeasement and explain how it paved the way for World War II. So basically, here in this lesson, you're learning this word appeasement. Okay. And that word means giving in to an aggressor in order to avoid conflict. All right. So a good example of this is the United States during World War II. We gave in a lot to Germany's demands in order to avoid going to war with them. Okay. Another term you need to know is annex, which means to take over a country. So throughout this lesson, you're going to see where Germany annexed Czechoslovakia. And that just means that they took over that territory and made it their own. All right. So in this lesson, students will closely examine how and why European leaders continued to give in to Hitler's demands. So you are looking at why leaders across the globe, the United States and other European leaders, continued to give in to Hitler's demands during this time prior to World War II. So what we're going to do first is read the passage Risk and Reward, and then answer the questions below based on what you read. So I am going to scroll down here in just a second, and we are going to read that short passage Risk and Reward. So Risk and Reward. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, he promised to get Germany back on her feet after the devastation and humiliation of World War I. In addition to the economic depression they were suffering, Germans were also bitter over the punishment that had been dealt them by the Versailles Treaty. To bring the nation back to glory, Hitler made plans to build an empire to restore the strength of Germany and the pride of its people. To do so, he took actions that directly violated the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, now I want to pause here. There's a couple of things that I want to show you and want to do with you. Okay, so I personally think this first sentence is kind of important, right? We're talking about Hitler here, how he came to power in 1933. That year is pretty important. And how he also promised to get Germany back on her feet after the devastation and humiliation of World War I. Right? So these are the things that Hitler had promised to do for people. So I think that this is important. So I'm going to highlight it. I'm actually going to pick a pretty color. Okay. So I'm highlighting that because as I read that, pegged that to be an important sentence, an important statement. All right. So what I'm doing here is text marking. The next thing from that paragraph that I found to be important was that Germans were bitter by the punishment that had been dealt them by the Versailles Treaty. All right, so I'm going to highlight that as well. But I'm also going to want to make a note here. I want to remind myself what the Versailles Treaty was. Okay. And so you notice every time I highlight something, a little plus box comes up. You click that and you can add a comment. So this is how you're going to write in your margins. All right, so if you click there and make a comment, we're going to remind ourselves what the Treaty of Versailles was. So I'm just going to remind myself of the important part, right? Germany had to pay reparations for the damage caused. And then I click comment, and then it stays there in that margin, right? So it's always there. It's connected to the Versailles Treaty where I highlighted it, right? So it's going to be there, and I'm going to see it every time I scroll up and down. All right. So to bring the nation back to glory, Hitler made plans to build an empire to restore the strength of Germany and the pride of its people. To do so, he took actions that directly violated the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. I think that's very important. All right, so I'm going to highlight it. On to the next paragraph. He first turned his attention to the Rhineland, a province located on the western border of Germany next to Belgium. Since Germany had attacked this neutral country during the last war, the Allies had established it as a demilitarized zone, an area where no troops and weapons were allowed, in order to ease Belgium's fear of German aggression. Since it was the heart of German industry and agriculture, Hitler knew he needed the Rhineland under his control. So in March of 1936, he sent 32,000 troops and police into the area. Hitler knew the action was a huge gamble because his military was not strong enough to fight if the French or British challenged him. Much to his relief, the French protested but did not fight, and the British attitude was that it was Germany's backyard, so they should hardly be concerned. Okay. So I'm going to highlight Rhineland up here. I don't think that entire sentence is very important, but I want to remind myself what this paragraph is talking about, right? It's talking about the Rhineland and how Germany annexed it. So here he says in March of 1936, he sent 32,000 troops and police into the area. All right, I want to highlight that as well because I know that it's talking about the Rhineland here and how he kind of took control of it. It also says that Hitler knew this was a huge gamble because his military was not strong enough to fight if the French or British challenged him. So I'm going to highlight that as well. Go ahead and highlight that whole sentence. All right, and then I'm going to highlight the end of this, and I'm also going to make a note to myself that this is appeasement, right? So I'm going to highlight the end of it because this was the Europeans' reaction. All right. And I'm going to highlight the part where it says French protested but did not fight. And then Britain's attitude was that it was Germany's backyard. So I'm going to put a note in here to myself. Tell me that that is appeasement, right? Because that is appeasement. It's a perfect example of it. All right. They protested but didn't do anything about it. So 2 years later, Hitler once more ignored the Versailles Treaty and annexed Austria. He had many supporters in Austria, as the Nazi Party had already grown in number there. Much to the dismay of the Austrian Chancellor, Hitler sent in his army to take over the government and create an Anschluss, I don't know if that's how you say that word, or union between the two countries. Again, the French and British chose not to intervene. While speaking to a cheering crowd in his hometown of Linz, Austria, he said, "I left this town years ago with precisely the same beliefs as I have today. Imagine how deeply I feel imagine how deeply I feel now that I have brought my beliefs to fulfillment. Providence, or God, gave me a mission to restore my dear homeland to the German Reich, or state. I believed in that mission, and I have lived and fought for it, and I believe I have now fulfilled it." Okay. So, we're going to highlight this first sentence here as well, where it says 2 years later, he ignored and annexed Austria. All right, because we want to remind ourselves that he is still trying to take over other lands. He's still breaking that Treaty of Versailles. Here it says he had supporters in Austria. So the Nazis had already grown in number there. So the Austrian Chancellor, or there was a chancellor in Austria, and Hitler sent in his army to take over that government and create a union between the two countries. So that's important there as well. Again, the French and the British chose not to intervene. That's very important again because that is what? Right. And then we can highlight this part where he talks about how God gave him a mission. Right. This is why Hitler believed he should annex countries, because he believed that God had given him All right, so then we have these three questions, excuse me, down here at the bottom that are important for your understanding of this passage. So list and describe the risks Hitler took in annexing the Rhineland and Austria. All right, it says up here at the top, it was one that we had highlighted. It said Hitler knew the action was a gamble because his military was not strong enough to fight if the French or the British challenged him. So I'll hit enter here and just begin typing, and I will say Hitler knew that it was a risk. His army was not strong enough. French, British choose. All right. List and describe the potential rewards of these actions. So we know that there would have been two rewards in both of these situations, right? If it had worked out for him like it did, then he would have been able to annex Rhineland and he would have been able to annex Austria. So those are the rewards that he would have gotten. And the last question, why do you think France, Great Britain, and other nations did not get involved in either of the two situations? Well, we can scroll back up and reference what it says. So it says here, much to his relief, the French protested and did not fight, and the British attitude was that it was Germany's backyard, so they should hardly be concerned. That was one of the reasons. And then it doesn't really say much about how they felt towards Austria. It just says that they chose not to intervene. But we can assume, because the passage says that the Nazi Party had already grown in number there, we can go ahead and highlight this as well, that the French and the British would believe that Austria would not want them to intervene. So we can say Great Britain believed that the Rhineland was Germany's backyard and they should not be concerned. And then Austria already largely supported the Nazi Party and therefore may not have wanted other European countries to enter. So that gets us through with the risk and reward. Okay. So then we're going to read Hitler's memo and determine some reasons as to why Hitler would invade Czechoslovakia and how he dealt with those who opposed him. So I'm not going to do this part with you. I'm going to let you do that part on your own and then kind of think about why Hitler chose to invade Czechoslovakia. All right, we already know that he invaded the Rhineland and invaded Austria and was successful for those two things. Okay, so think about how that would have influenced him to further invade other places. And then lastly, you will read the quotes by each of the world leaders and determine their positions or their beliefs about how this would have allowed Hitler to annex Czechoslovakia. Okay, and by this I mean appeasement. Would have allowed Hitler to annex Czechoslovakia. Right? So we're going to scroll down. And I'm just going to roll quickly. This you just read, and again, remember you can go in and highlight and add your comments to text mark. This I'm just going to real quickly show you how to do. So The directions are, in your own words, explain each person's position and how it may have contributed to the Munich Agreement that allowed Hitler to invade and annex Czechoslovakia in 1939. Click in the box below each quote to begin typing your explanation. All right, so we're going to do FDR together. We shun political commitments which might entangle us in foreign wars. Okay, remember this word foreign here means overseas or outside of our own country. And if you shun something, right, you're pushing it away. You're not agreeing to it. So we shun political commitments which might entangle us in foreign wars. All right, so to answer this question, I'm just going to click in the box and let's remind ourselves what we're putting in here. It says, in your own words, explain each person's position and how it may have contributed to the Munich Agreement that allowed Hitler to invade Czechoslovakia in 1939. So here we're just going to say FDR did not want to get involved in other, we're just going to say in foreign affairs, especially one that may lead to war. Okay. That's all we do. We just click in that box, give a little blurb about the quote and how it could have influenced Hitler and his ability to annex so many different lands, and then we move on to the next one. Okay? And that's pretty much it, guys. I'm going to scroll back up here and we'll wrap things up. So again, as you go through this stuff, think about what are the advantages and disadvantages of appeasement. So remember that appeasement holds the war off for now, right? But in the long term, it doesn't necessarily hold off war. And you guys know that to be true because we see World War II happen shortly thereafter the appeasement. So to wrap up everything, unfortunately, despite Britain and France's best efforts at appeasement, Hitler broke his word to Chamberlain and others and invaded Poland in September 1939. As promised, the French and British pledged to defend Poland, which had since its establishment signed on to join the Allied powers. Thus, they declared war on Germany on September 3rd, 1939, marking the start of World War II. Okay, so we see here that appeasement did not last and it did not work out for everybody in the long run. All right. So if you guys have any questions, as always, shoot me an email. I'll be happy to help you out. And good luck in completing this assignment.